Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so happy to be here. I do wish it were in person. Maybe that will happen in 2021. Fingers crossed. Like Sue said, I'm a dietitian. I've been a dietitian for over 20 years now. And again, like she said, I work for the Valley Hospital at a clinic in Hawthorne and right here for the Valley Center for Health and Wellness, where I get to do presentations like this one for wonderful people like yourselves. And like I said, I wish it were in person so I could see you all, maybe next time. Anyway, today we are going to talk about inflammation. What a fun subject. What is inflammation? Why is it bad for us? What does nutrition have to do with it at all? How does our diet and what we eat affect inflammation? Let me see here. First, we're going to talk, let me get my slides working. First, we're going to talk about what inflammation is. We're going to go back to the basics. There are two types of inflammation. The one that we're probably most familiar with is something called acute inflammation. This is basically how your body responds to something like an injury, an irritation, or an infection. It's the healthy way your body tries to repair itself, fight off infections, and process toxins. It's, again, a normal response. And when we think of acute inflammation, we usually think of redness, swelling, pain. I mean, you can all imagine like when you get a cut, and there's redness, swelling, pain, even a pimple, right? You get some, and that would be an example of acute inflammation. Now, the other type of inflammation that will be the focus, the main focus of this presentation, is what we call chronic inflammation. This is long-term inflammation, one that can last weeks, months, or even years. And something also about chronic inflammation, you might not even know it's occurring, okay? Although damaged tissue can't heal without inflammation, chronic inflammation has been linked to several diseases and conditions. It's when your body no longer has the ability to turn off the inflammatory response and it starts to damage healthy tissue. For instance, it could damage the intestinal lining in your gut, which may cause some digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome. It could damage the arteries in your heart, which could lead to heart disease, or damage your joints, leading to certain types of arthritis. A big problem with chronic inflammation, other than what I just mentioned, of course, is that long-term chronic inflammation is that it may injure the body's own DNA, which puts one at greater risk for developing cancer. Another way to look at chronic inflammation is that sometimes it's what we call persistent low-grade inflammation. It happens when the body sends an inflammatory response to a perceived internal threat that doesn't really require or need an inflammatory response. When this happens, the immune system is triggered, white blood cells get involved, but they really have nothing to do and there's no place for them to go, okay? So it's at this time that the white blood cells are like, we don't have anything to do. So they might start attacking internal organs, other tissues, or healthy cells, which is never a good thing. It's just never good. So, chronic inflammation can be a result from a number of things. Okay, a failure to eliminate whatever was causing the acute inflammation, an autoimmune response, like the immune system attacking normal, healthy tissue, mistaking it for harmful pathogens, or exposure to a low level of a particular irritant, like a certain chemical or pollution, like in environmental factors, over a long period of time. Remember that those don't necessarily cause the inflammation for everyone, but it can for some, okay? Also of note is that sometimes chronic inflammation doesn't even have a clear cause. There are other factors as well that may lead to chronic inflammation, and they should not be overlooked. And for the purpose of this talk, we're not going to focus on all of these, but it just should be noted that these things like smoking, obesity, stress, poor diet, and alcohol may lead to chronic inflammation or be associated with chronic inflammation. And something that's not on here that should also be is of importance is making sure you get enough sleep, proper sleep, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, chronic inflammation over time may start to damage your healthy cells, tissues, and organs. You can just imagine the effect that this could actually have on your body, right? If you think about it.
Right.
This type of inflammation has been linked to several diseases. Not that it causes them, but these conditions have been linked to chronic inflammation. Some, but not all, are listed below. We've got heart disease, type 2 diabetes, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, digestive issues like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndromes, that's what the IBS stands for, ulcerative colitis. Okay, see if you see here, these are examples of diseases and conditions that include chronic inflammation, right? We mentioned some autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, pulmonary diseases. I think I said arthritis already, but as you could see here, all linked together. What are some things that we might be doing to contribute to prolonged inflammation in the body as it relates to diet? Because that's the purpose of this talk. There's many things, as we said before, smoking for one, lack of sleep and stress, but for our purpose, we're going to talk about diet or nutrition, okay? The following are some examples of pro-inflammatory habits. Pro-inflammatory meaning it contributes to inflammation. Things that we might be doing to contribute to prolonged inflammation in the body. So if stress, obesity, poor diet are some related issues to inflammation, then we see that the following could be a problem. Well, number one, excess calorie intake. Eating too many calories or eating more than one needs, that in turn promotes obesity, which we know is associated with chronic inflammation from what we talked about earlier. Two, excess intake of refined carbohydrates and sugars. Eating too many refined carbohydrates as well as sugar has been linked to increased inflammation in humans. Intake of trans fatty acids, also known as partially hydrogenated oils. Not only are trans fats a known risk factor for heart disease, they can induce what we call an inflammatory response in cardiac heart tissue through their effect on cell membranes. They can stimulate the release of something, I won't get too much into this, but they can release something called pro-inflammatory cytokines. Pro-inflammatory cytokines are basically a type of protein that can initiate an inflammatory response. Another thing, saturated fats. Saturated fats in excess intake, keyword being in excess, can also stimulate the secretion of these inflammatory cytokines, okay? Another thing, omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. A diet high in these is no good either. During the last several decades, intake of these oils are high in these studies and have steadily gone up because they're used in many processed foods, okay? This change has been associated with an increased risk of inflammatory disease. We do need omega-6 fatty acids in our diet. They are an essential part of our diet. We definitely need them. But the problem is that we're having an excess. We're eating too many of them. And that's what's causing the problem. Okay. Also, like I mentioned before, it's worth noting lack of sleep and prolonged unmanaged stress is associated with chronic inflammation as well. It's just something to keep in mind. Okay, we're not going to go into detail on that, but it's worth noting. Okay, I want to take some time and go over some examples of foods that would go into the categories that we just reviewed above, as far as like the refined carbohydrates, trans fats, saturated fats, and the omega-6s. So you can get an idea of where these foods can be found, okay? And remember, nutrients play a key role in both promoting and combating the inflammatory process, okay? So now we're focusing on the pro-inflammatory nutrients. Okay, refined carbs. Refined carbs, or simple carbs, as they can also be called, are things that include sugars and refined grains. When we say refined grains, we're talking about grains that have basically been stripped of their nutrients. The bran and the fiber are taken away, most of the good stuff, okay? Those are things like, so white breads, pastas, I'm talking about white pastas, pastries, white flour, anything made with white flour, white rice, desserts. Think about all the prepackaged foods we buy. Most of them are made with refined carbohydrates. Many of the processed foods that we eat contained refined carbs. What about trans fats? Again, also called partially hydrogenated fats. Well, there are some that are naturally occurring. There are some naturally occurring trans fats. Most trans fats are basically made in a factory, and it's a process by which they take a liquid vegetable fat and turn it into a solid fat or a semi-solid fat. Okay, so it's a factory-made fat in most cases. They are cheap fats. So why do you, of course, this is why they're used in most often processed foods, okay, because they're cheap and they have a long shape. They're shelf stable, okay, so they put them in things that can last long on the shelf, which is why they're often used in processed foods. You'll typically find them in things like baked goods, cookies, crackers, margarine, cakes, frozen pizzas, fried foods. Again, just think about all the packaged goods you buy at the grocery store or at the convenience store, the things that are grab and go. They are all likely made with some type of trans fat. The thing is, if you take a look at the label under where it says fat, oftentimes it'll list the amount of trans fat in the item. You might be fooled because it might say 0 trans fats, but that's because it may contain less than 0.5 grams per serving. If it's less than 0.5 grams per serving, they can put that it contains 0 trans fats. Go ahead and read the ingredient list. If it says that it's made, if there's an ingredient that says partially hydrogenated oil, then you can be absolutely sure that there are some trans fats in there, even if it says 0. I hope that makes sense, okay? All right, saturated fats. Again, these are fats that are typically solid at room temperature. Where could you find saturated fats? Butter, for one, cream, full fat milk products, fatty meats. When you buy a piece of meat and you see, you know, obviously a lot of times you'll just see the thick white fat around the edge. That's saturated fat, but a lot of times you'll find a piece of meat that has a lot of white rippled through it. That's called marbling. The marbling is fat that's saturated fat. Cheese, and again, other dairy products that are made from whole milk or some reduced fat milks. Also, the skin of poultry, you know, chicken or turkey skin would be considered saturated fat. Okay, here we go. Omega-6, the polyunsaturated fatty acids. These fats, again, essential for us, but we consume more than we need, and that is the main issue with them, okay? These fats are found in large amounts in refined vegetable oils and foods cooked in these vegetable oils. Nuts and seeds are also a source, but again, nuts and seeds have benefits. The problem, again, is that we're eating too much of some of these. Examples of where you'd find these types of fatty acids, things like soybean oil, corn oil, other vegetable oils, mayonnaise, walnuts, and almonds. It's more so in the vegetable oils. I'm not saying walnuts and almonds are bad. That, you know, again, these fatty acids are essential. It's just that we're tending to eat too much of them, and the source is likely coming from the processed foods we're eating and not the walnuts and the almonds. Okay, now that we've talked about foods that increase our risk of inflammation, I want to change our focus and talk about the nutrients that are important in combating the process of inflammation, or anti-inflammatory nutrients. Okay. The first thing that we're going to talk about are the omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. A lot of times you'll just hear people say omega-3s. It's omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are essential for us too, just like the omega-6s, and we have to get them from our diets. The omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, found in fatty fish and fish oils, oil supplements, help suppress the production of pro-inflammatory molecules that stimulate anti-inflammatory compounds. Oily fish is the best source of omega-3s, the EPA and the DHA. That's the best source of those. Some good sources of omega-3 in food are salmon, mackerel, sardines, again, your fatty fishes, chia seeds, walnuts, flax seeds. It's worth noting that there is really no official standard for daily omega-3 intake. Okay. Vitamin E. This is a powerful antioxidant. It's been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties. Some good sources are almonds, peanuts, sunflower seeds, green leafy vegetables like spinach and broccoli, avocado, eggs. Also of note, not listed on the slide, but vitamin C is also known to reduce tissue damage at inflammation sites, so it's also a good anti-inflammatory nutrient. You'd find vitamin C in abundance in citrus fruits, tomatoes, potatoes, red and green peppers, broccoli, mostly lots of fruits and vegetables. Okay, now we're going to go polyphenols. Okay, this is another good a good anti-inflammatory nutrient. It's a category of plant compounds. They have powerful anti-inflammatory effects, help decrease those pro-inflammatory cytokine productions, and they're found in things like tea, dark chocolate, berries, legumes, nuts, seeds, grains, numerous fruits and vegetables. Also, pre and probiotics, they both support the good bacteria in our gut, and studies have shown that they may help reduce the activity of pro-inflammatory cytokines, so they would be good for anti-inflammatory reasons. Prebiotic foods would be things like onions, garlic, asparagus, certain types of artichokes, whole grains. When we're thinking of probiotic foods, let's see, probiotic foods, we're talking yogurt, kefir, fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut, also some fermented cheeses like Gouda. Prebiotics help healthy bacteria grow in your gut. They basically serve as food for the probiotics, and probiotics are the live bacteria that live in your body. Okay, now that we know how chronic inflammation can negatively impact our health, as well as what foods may contribute to inflammation and what food sources are beneficial in combating the chronic inflammation, where do we go from here? What is the takeaway? What can we do now? Everybody wants that magic pill, that magic answer, but I'm going to say it's not magic. It's basically what we know already. Eating a variety of nutritious foods, whole foods, avoiding the packaged processed foods as best we can. Listen, I know out of convenience, it's easy to do that, but trying to eliminate as much as we can. A diet high in fruits and vegetables may be our best defense in fighting chronic inflammation. They're good sources of vitamins, minerals, fiber, polyphenols. Eating a variety of fruits and vegetables. Think eating the colors of the rainbow, okay? Try and include them with all your meals. Get creative. Try adding veggies to breakfast. If you're doing eggs, throw some spinach in there. Do avocado toast. If you're making some kind of protein shake in the morning, throw in some spinach. It might turn the color, make it a little wonky, but I promise you won't taste it. So just get creative. Honestly, it doesn't matter what type of vegetable or fruit you're eating, whether it's fresh, frozen, or canned. Just try to get them in. Just try to make sure, especially if you're doing canned or packaged fruit, that doesn't contain any added sugar. You want it packaged in its own fruit juice. Again, if it's canned vegetables, as long as you're getting them in, I would choose the low salt or unsalted versions. When it comes to choosing your protein, we're talking about like meat, chicken, pork, whatever, be smart with your choices. Picking lean protein foods like skinless chicken or turkey, lean cuts of beef and pork. And of course, trying to include those fatty fish in your diet, like getting salmon in a couple times a week to get those omega-3s in. Limiting the highly processed meats like deli meats. That's also should be known. Again, when you're choosing proteins wisely, that means limiting the processed meats, the deli meats, the bacon, the sausage, okay? Make sure you're choosing whole grains rather than their highly processed counterparts with the white flours. Whole grain breads, cereals, crackers. Try brown rice, quinoa, oatmeal. Read the labels. Make sure a lot of it is packaged in a way where it might say whole wheat, but that doesn't necessarily mean whole grain. So just, be aware and read. It's important to start reading the labels. Limiting the amount of saturated fat and trans fats in our diet, which means avoiding a lot of the highly processed foods. Choosing low-fat dairy products, as in less than 2%. So like either skim or 1% dairy products. Cut down on those sugary drinks, including sodas, juices, iced teas. Too much sugar is no good. Also, when you're drinking any kind of sugary drinks, including 100% fruit juice, they don't really provide much nutrition. They provide a lot of calories and a lot of sugar. We talked about including fatty fish in your diet already, but eating less fast food. A lot of fast food places use trans fats in their cooking, which we know is not good in terms of inflammation. So if you're going to a fast food place, I know many of them have items like a grilled chicken salad, so opt for that. It's not always easy when you're on the road, you're traveling somewhere, you're trying to make wise choices. I get it, we all eat fast food once in a while, but trying to stick to something that's either grilled. I would rather even have you eat a hamburger than a fried whatever off the menu. Try adding more beans and lentils to your diet. These are good sources of protein, and you can even replace red meat in many of your meals. Try, a lot of people do meatless Mondays. So once a week, maybe do a meatless Monday. There are tons of options online to try a vegetarian meal. And don't be scared about using fresh herbs and spices to spice it up, get some extra nutrients. Okay, so this is basically summing it all up, foods that fight inflammation, what to choose, what to avoid. Here it says that chronic inflammation has been linked to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, depression, and Alzheimer's. Fight inflammation with a healthy diet, doing some of the things that we've just talked about, okay? Now we're going to do a little quiz here at the end. I know I can't hear any answers, but we'll go over this together. Some questions might be a little tricky because it's not all about nutrition, but we'll know who's paying attention if you get the answers right, okay? So the quiz is basically, is it pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? Okay, working 100 hours a week at a stressful job with no sleep. What do you think? Is this pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? This would be pro-inflammatory because we just discussed briefly how stress plays a role in inflammation, okay? Working 100 hours a week at a stressful job with little sleep, and also the little sleep, we definitely need a good amount of sleep. Try to get those 7 to 8 hours in for better to combat the inflammation. What about adequate intake of a variety of fruits and vegetables? We just discussed this. This would be anti-inflammatory. We want to get as many fruits and vegetables in a day as we can. Eating a diet high in refined carbs and sugars, again, big topic that we just discussed. This would be anti-inflammatory. Oh, I'm confusing myself. Wait a minute. I apologize. This is pro-inflammatory. Eating a diet high in refined carbs and sugar is pro-inflammatory. Okay. Drinking more than 1 alcoholic beverage per day. That would also be pro-inflammatory. Again, a little tricky. We didn't go into much about this, but drinking too much alcohol could also be pro-inflammatory. Getting to 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I cannot emphasize how important sleep is in general, not just for inflammation, but in general. That is anti-inflammatory. Make sure you're getting your rest in. Okay, this is a trick question. Eating mostly non-organic foods, both animal and plant. Well, you could probably argue either way, but I'm going to say this is anti-inflammatory. I don't care how you get your vegetables in or your fruits in, if it's organic or not organic, if it's canned, whatever, we want you to get them in, and also choosing lean cuts of meat. Okay. Regular stress management and positive thinking. This is anti-inflammatory. Okay. And last but not least, not exercising. Again, we briefly discussed it, but not exercising would be pro-inflammatory. Exercise has so many benefits. One of them is that it's anti-inflammatory. I'll just end with this. Years of making pro-inflammatory choices can add up to chronic inflammation, and that's a problem. And also, chronic inflammation is something that takes weeks, months, and years to build up to, and you might not even know that it's going on. So just making changes, especially in your diet, like we discussed, will be very beneficial to you. I appreciate your time today for listening to me, and I would like to open it up if there are any questions. I'd be happy to answer any of them.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was excellent. Really, really great. I do have a few questions. If everyone can hear me okay? You can hear me?
I could hear you.
Great, great. I know some of these might have been answered already, but just if you could give us an example of an omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid. Would you know that?
Yes, so the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, those are mostly in like refined vegetable oils. and foods cooked in those refined vegetable oils. Again, nuts and seeds, they're in those too, but I wouldn't, because omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids are essential in our diet, those nuts and seeds are good for us because they also contain omega-3. So I wouldn't be so worried so much about them. It's mostly the things that are cooked or made with those refined vegetable oils. And you'll find those mostly in the processed packaged goods on our grocery store shelves.
Great. A question about farm-raised salmon versus wild salmon. Does the farm-raised salmon have the same amount of omega-3 as wild salmon? And does it make a difference if you choose wild or farm-raised salmon?
So from what I've read and what I understand, wild salmon is higher in omega-3s than the farm-raised. So if you have the option, I would choose the wild over the farm-raised.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, another question. Someone had said that they had heard that whole milk cheeses or yogurts are less processed. So in general, so it's better for you than low fat. And that seems different from what you're saying. What are your feelings about whole fat versus low fat?
You know, that's a great question. And there's a lot of controversy about the whole fat versus the skim. Is the skim or low fat milk more processed? Yes, but it's removing the saturated fat, which is also pro-inflammatory, and it is also linked to a diet high in saturated fat is linked to heart disease. So it's a fine line, and it is some people are, can go either way.
Okay, so interesting question. Someone had said when they do not eat kale with dinner, they eat a lot of kale. When they do not, their joints are stiff and painful. Is there a phytochemical in kale that helps arthritis, inflammation that you know of?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Not that I know of off the top of my head, but it's amazing how our body works. And if they feel that kale is something that helps them, maybe there's something in it for them that's helping their joints. But I'm not sure of a specific nutrient in kale.
Okay.
I'll have to look
about your opinion on fish oil supplements and what should they have in them, a high quality fish oil supplement, to help with the inflammation issue. Do you have any idea?
So when it gets into supplements, I really don't like to outwardly give recommendations on what people should be taking. I kind of say, speak to your doctor to give recommendations on the dosage, because it depends on what your past medical history is, what, if you have any diseases or what other medications you're taking, if there's any drug nutrient interactions. So okay. Unfortunately, I like to throw it back to the doctor because I don't know what, for each individual, what they should be taking.
Okay. Someone asked about artificial sweeteners and if they have any negative effects in relation to inflammation.
Not in any of the research that I've done, but I would try to maybe do one that's more quote unquote natural, like a stevia. Also, there's on the market a monk fruit sweetener. I happen to use it. To me, it's the least artificial tasting. Because remember, also during the talk, a diet high in sugar is more pro-inflammatory. So using a sugar substitute would be better than using the sugar.
Okay. What are your feelings about olive oil? It's as a refined oil. Is it pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory?
Olive oil, wait, let me even see if I can go back to the last slide. Olive oil, as you can see, if my slides are still showing, it is one of the anti-inflammation foods. So olive oil is perfectly good.
All right. And I know you talk about nuts. What would you say would be a good quantity of nuts to have in general? And is peanut butter pro or anti-inflammatory? What's your feeling on that?
I would say, nuts are good. And also, if anybody's looked up the Mediterranean diet, that's sort of a good, people like to equate that with a good anti-inflammatory diet. So, they have olives and lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. And even here on the anti-inflammation foods, you could see nuts, almonds, walnuts, other types of nuts. The issue with nuts is, when we say nuts are good, people end up having, like a cup of them as a serving. I would say like a quarter cup serving, would be ideal, because again, they're very high in fat. So if you're going to eat a lot of nuts, you're adding a lot more calories, which also isn't good. So, moderation. Same thing with nut butters, whether it's, peanut or almond butter. When looking for a nut butter, though, my recommendation is to choose one that's least processed. So there are products on the market. Again, this is where label reading comes in. I would choose a nut that is made with just the nut itself and salt if you want, or just the nut itself. A lot of them add different types of oils to it, and some add sugar. So then you're adding a hydrogenated oil and a sugar to it. So look at the label, look at the ingredient list.
Okay. Questions about inflammation in general. A is, can you get a test for inflammation? And B is chronic itching a sign of inflammation, to your knowledge?
I don't know about the chronic itching. I apologize. But as far as tests, one test that I've heard a lot about is something called CRP, C-reactive protein. I feel like more and more doctors are, when you get a blood test, a lot of times they check for this, and that is, if not necessarily saying you have inflammation, but it's a marker of inflammation.
Okay. All right. So the C-reactive protein.
Yep.
Okay. And this is another question, interesting. Once you have chronic inflammation and damage, will doing this possibly reverse it? Can it be reversed, and would a diet do that?
So I believe, I mean, could it completely cure it? The jury's still out, but changing your diet, including, eliminating the pro-inflammatory foods and changing it to more of an anti-inflammatory diet, is definitely going to improve inflammation. It'll improve your quality of life, because again, a lot of people with chronic inflammation, it might, you might be diabetic, heart disease. So changing to an anti-inflammatory diet could improve the diabetes, the heart disease. So you're only going to get benefits from changing changing and choosing anti-inflammatory foods. The big thing is choosing less packaged and processed foods and going with more whole foods.
Okay, whole foods, the Mediterranean diet. I hear the theme, right?
Whole foods, whole foods.
Yeah, no, they're the best. So just again, a lot of questions about dairy. Putting aside the whole fat versus low fat, is dairy in general pro-inflammatory, or what is it?
Again, this is dairy is a very controversial nowadays, I guess. I would say, again, in everything in moderation, not, you know, as far as dairy can be a part of a healthy anti-inflammatory diet. You just want to make sure you're choosing low fat. It doesn't have to be fat free. If you prefer a lower fat version, that's okay too. You just need to watch your portion sizing, and I'm going to say, like, when we're talking about dairy, we're talking about, you know, low fat or fat free yogurts and milk, cheeses. We're not talking about like ice cream and yogurts that have the fruit in the bottom, you know, because that's just adding extra sugar to it. Again, you want to read your labels, because I could be saying yogurt, but you want to look at the label, see also, are they adding sugar to it? Because that's also an issue.
Okay. And I've had a couple questions about canola oil. You may have mentioned this, but forgive me. Is canola oil okay to cook with?
I would switch to something like olive oil. Canola oil would be one of those omega-6 polyunsaturated, the processed vegetable oil, along with like soybean oil and corn oil.
Okay. All right. I think that's about it. I'm just looking here. This was so informative and interesting. Thank you so much. It just sounds like you're really focusing on, you know, just eating what they call clean and whole, right? And
right.
Mediterranean diet, moderation. Thank you so much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate your time.